evening. Welcome to Mondays with MoCo. I am Dennis Melby with the Republican Party. For the folks at home, let's get started now. And as more folks come in, we'll let them in. We have an hour for our program, and our honored speakers and guests have commitments other than that. I'm glad you're able to join us via technology. We have a great Zoom presentation for you and a wonderful discussion. Today, we have two great speakers, and time permitting, questions at the end. If you're familiar with Zoom, there's a little Q&A button at the bottom. If you tap that and write in your question, we'll give it to Jamie Greeden, and she can ask the panelists at the end. Looking through my end of the camera, you all look so good. It's so nice to see so many good-looking people, fellow Republican Central Committee members. Working with me tonight, the seminar, are committee members Jamie Greeden and Paul Agel. It was put together by the chairman of our organization committee, Brad Botman, and we're hoping that Reardon Sullivan can join us a little bit later and say a few words. Well, we're into 2022 and we made it through April Fool's Day, and I checked the next day and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are still in the jobs that they're in. So I was hoping that the joke was on me, but apparently it wasn't. Spring seems to be finally here. This week is Passover and Easter, and I wish you, your family, and your friends a very happy and meaningful holiday. As far as the local Republicans, lots is going on. We won a big gerrymandering case, and new election maps became law for the state of Maryland. The courts moved all the dates. Believe it or not, people can still register to run for office. Friday is the last day. Stay tuned for the final list of who's running for what and where. Our local party is hosting its 2022 convention in Gaithersburg, Saturday, April 30th. You can register and get tickets at MCGOP.com. That's MCGOP.com. It'll be great to see you there. We're working on some famous folks appearing. Matt and Mercedes Schlapp from CPAC, Larry O'Connor from WMAL, and James Carafano from the Heritage Institute are just some of the folks that have been invited. Stay tuned for more information. Of course, we found yet another Hunter Biden laptop to raffle off, so things should get pretty exciting. In our webinar series every month, we explore important issues facing our community. Among the many guests we've had were Dr. Carol Swain, Sheriff Chuck Jenkins, ICE Director Tom Homan, Dr. Christopher Shore, author Kenny Chu, State Senator Huff, Delegates Harakan and Shaliga, Hans von Spakovsky, and Congressman Andy Harris, just to name drop a few. Last month, we featured author Kara Dansky talking about biological men competing in women's sports. Tonight, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has put a spotlight on the importance of reliable energy supplies. Germany and neighboring countries are awakening to the fact that being dependent on Russian natural gas doesn't seem to make economic or political sense after all, especially for the Germans who unilaterally decided to turn off their extensive nuclear electric power operations for environmental reasons. The Biden administration's green lighting of the Russian Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline to Germany added to this foolish dependency folly. Biden further added to Europe's dependency woes by nixing support for other proposed pipelines into Southern Europe. Energy choices and competition are a blessing, not a sin. Biden energy policies have failed on the home front as well. America has gone from energy independence and being a net exporter of energy to energy dependence in less than a year. Stopping oil and natural gas pipeline construction, adding burdensome rules and regulations to inhibit the private sector from exploring and drilling for energy, as well as refining, has caused oil and gas prices to skyrocket well before the Ukraine crisis. Shocking $5 per gallon and rising gasoline and even higher diesel fuel prices are the new Biden normal. As the inflation level rises to record heights, the manufacturing, agricultural, transportation, and almost other sectors will see further increased energy and feedstock cost, which of course will be passed on to the consumer. On the other hand, Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla and maybe Twitter, stated, hate to say, but we need to increase oil and gas output immediately. Extraordinary times demand extraordinary measures. Obviously, this would have negative impact on Tesla, but sustainable energy solutions simply cannot react instantaneously to make up for Russian oil and gas exports. Musk followed up with, hopefully, it is now extremely obvious that Europe should restart dormant nuclear power stations and increase power output of existing ones. Musk tweeted, this is critical to national and international security. You know, we can do the same in Maryland by expanding the Calvert Cliffs nuclear facility in Lusby as part of an industry-government partnership. John Kotek is the Nuclear Energy Institute's Senior Vice President of Policy Development and Public Affairs. He's responsible for providing policy and public affairs leadership on financial, economic, tax, electricity market, and environmental issues related to the nuclear energy industry. Previously, he was appointed to the position of Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Department of Energy, Office of Nuclear Energy, was the managing partner of the Boise office of Gallatin Public Affairs, and served as staff director of the Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future, which recommended a new strategy for managing nuclear waste in the United States. He was also deputy manager of DOE's Idaho Operations Office. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in nuclear engineering from the University of Illinois and a Master of Business Administration from the University of Maryland. We're glad to welcome him here. Mr. Kotek, please give us your perspective, your insights, your thoughts on the promise of clean nuclear energy.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks, Dennis. Really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all tonight. If it works here, I'm going to share a screen here, show a few images to go along with my remarks here, keep it to about 20 minutes. This is telling me the host is disabled screen sharing. If that's not possible, that's certainly fine. But if y'all can make that work, that would be great. The bottom line with with nuclear in the U.S. right now is we're seeing a lot more interest, frankly, on a bipartisan basis. I'm proud to say, and let me start with just a basic overview for folks. Dennis, you mentioned the Calvert Cliffs nuclear plant in Maryland, which is by far the largest source of electricity in the state of Maryland. All told, across the U.S., there are 93 reactors at 54 plant sites. Most of them are located in the eastern part of the U.S., and it looks like we've got the ability to share here. So let me pull this up for you. And if you're seeing that image, we're in great shape. All right, and so you see most of the plants are in the East Coast or in the Midwest. One of the great can run out to 80 years. Almost all of them have already been licensed to operate out to 60 years, and we expect most to seek to approval from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to operate out to 80 years. Just as a sidebar, some folks may not realize the depth of involvement that Maryland and Montgomery County in particular have with the nuclear sectors. Host of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, I started my career with the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy, which is based out in Germantown. And there's a wide variety of other nuclear activities going on in the county, including being the headquarters of X Energy, an advanced reactor company I'll talk about here in a little bit. But all told, we've got thousands of Montgomery County residents working on nuclear. Nuclear generated nearly percent of electricity in 2021, as it has for decades. When you look at the situation with nuclear cost, you'll hear some folks talk about nuclear being expensive. And in fact, with today's nuclear power plants, we've seen costs reduce more than 30% over the last decade as companies have really found efficiencies in the operation of their nuclear plants, and as they've achieved really tremendous operational efficiency records. The challenge that nuclear has faced in the US is that electricity prices have gone down a lot. And Dennis, you talked about the abundance of resources we have here in the US, particularly natural gas. And frankly, it's been extremely low natural gas prices in the US that have caused prices in our electricity markets to drop so much. So a great thing for consumers writ large and for the nation, but a challenge for nuclear power plants. And it's caused some plants to have to seek state support to keep operating in those competitive markets. Fortunately, several states have stepped forward to take that action. And we expect to see our existing nuclear plants run, as I mentioned earlier, out to 80 years or more. Now, one of the reasons nuclear is increasingly embraced in the US is there's an increase now across the US, even without a national plan. More than 80% of the electricity consumers in the US are served by a utility that has made a decarbonization play. And as a result, that is causing utilities to say, all right, how am I going to meet that goal? And the first thing they conclude is, I want to keep all the nuclear I've got, and I want to start looking at new nuclear. Okay. Just as one example, this was a very influential study, came about 4 years ago, and it looked at what happens is just using renewables and energy storage alone. And that's this chart over on the left. So when they say fuel saving resources, they're saying resources without a fuel, like wind and solar power. And when they say fast burst, they mean resources that can respond quickly to changes in demand on the grid, right? And that's things like batteries that cover the short-term fluctuations. But if you try to decarbonize just using those resources, it's going to cost you a lot more than if you add in this third wedge they called firm low carbon. That's things like nuclear, it's like things like gas with carbon capture, deep geothermal. There are other things other than nuclear that can do the job, but the bottom line is you're going to want something that's available 24/7 to compensate for those intermittent resources like wind and solar if you're trying to clean up your electric grid. So what that's done is it's caused a bunch of companies to start investing in a wide range of new nuclear reactor technologies. So the reactors we have today, like the ones at Calvert Cliffs, they're really big, right? They're about 1,000 megawatts electric. And just by basis of comparison, the Energy Information Administration counts about 10,000 power plants connected to the US grid. Less than 1% of those are nuclear, yet nuclear provides 19% of our electricity. That gives you a sense of the scale, right, the size of these nuclear power plants. But as we look to the future of the grid, it may be that we want smaller generating resources. And so nuclear innovators are working on a wide variety of new nuclear technology. One category of microreactors are quite small, below 20 megawatts, most of them in the single digit megawatts. Those are intended for places where you need a really secure, long-term, reliable energy supply, or places where it's very difficult to get electricity. So think Alaska, right, where they have to fly in diesel a couple of times a year. Think about remote locations where they do mining or military installations, right? You can see some of these microreactors used there. Another class is what we call LWR. So that's water-cooled reactors. And the SMR stands for small modular reactors. These are, from a tenth to a third, give or take the size of today's reactors, intended to be much faster to fabricate and to construct. So you see companies like NuScale, which is based out in Oregon, that's really pioneering this technology. But others like General Electric, a real household name in nuclear, a company called Holtec, they're working on a range of these small modular reactors. Another class is high temperature gas reactors. And this is where X Energy from Rockville comes in, right? They're developing a new type of nuclear technology based on it's a different type of reactor fuel, a different type of coolant. So instead of being cooled by water, they're cooled by helium gas. And these are reactors that operate at much higher temperatures than today's reactors. And so they unlock the potential for nuclear to serve more than just electricity needs, but also to serve as a source of high temperature process heat, district heating, hydrogen production, a wide range of technologies. Same with liquid metal reactors and some of the molten salt reactors. These are also operated at higher temperatures. They're also being innovated by a wide range of companies. This TerraPower Natrium design, for example, is planned to be built at the site of a coal plant in Wyoming that's scheduled to shut down. And this is the company that Bill Gates founded to invest in next generation nuclear. So, wide variety of technologies under development here to serve a wide variety of applications. But one thing they all have in common is they've really been designed for cost competitiveness. The large reactors that we have take a long time to build. They're very expensive to build. These designs were, by virtue of being smaller and by relying on inherent safety characteristics, they should be much faster to market and cost much less to get to market. You should be able to do factory fabrication. You should be able to do faster construction. And you should be able to get to much lower costs in a relatively quickly period of time by virtue of the fact that these are really plants being built using off-the-shelf components. So that's why you're seeing more and more utilities starting to look at the possibility for new nuclear. So, one of these examples, this is an interesting concept. It involves both a liquid sodium reactor, which is, we've run these before. The facility I worked at in Idaho, for example, hosted a liquid sodium reactor. But it incorporates the ability to store heat through a molten salt thermal storage package. So you can fluctuate the output from this plant from 345 megawatts, which is the normal output, up to 500 megawatts if you need the energy. Or you can divert the output from electricity production to charge up this heat storage when demand is low. So we think this can fit in much better to future grids. So that will be demonstrated in Wyoming by the end of this decade, as will this X-Energy project. All right, so X-Energy in Rockville is working with a couple of utilities out in Washington State to demonstrate their helium-cooled reactor. As I mentioned, they use a very different fuel type. Rather than the long fuel rods that you may be familiar with in nuclear power plants, these use what they call TRISO fuel pellets that are about the size of say a billiard ball, right? And these are fed into a reactor, and the package of silicon carbide that they're housed in is extremely robust and provides an additional layer of safety protection that makes these extremely safe reactor facilities. There's another demonstration project underway. This one's in Idaho. It's being led by a group called the Utah Association of Municipal Power Systems. They intend to build a small modular reactor engineered by this company, NuScale, it's based out in Oregon, at the Idaho National Laboratory where I used to work, again, by the end of the decade. All three of these projects that I mentioned are being developed in public-private partnerships between the U.S. Department of Energy and these private sector companies. Got to give great props to former Senator Lamar Alexander, the Republican from Tennessee, who was really the one who led the charge on this advanced reactor demonstration program and really opened the door for a next generation of nuclear power plant construction in the U.S. Of course, there's more going on than just these projects I talked about. The ones that I mentioned are listed here. There are two large new reactors coming online in Georgia this year and next. There's a demonstration of that Oklo microreactor I talked about, also planned for Idaho. Another company plans to build a demonstration in Tennessee. And then it is working with Ontario Power Generation to build multiple small modular reactors there. Another microreactor company called USNC is working with a laboratory up in Canada. So there's a lot going on right now that's going to bring a next generation of nuclear to market by 2030. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, folks are looking beyond just the grid for electricity. There's a lot of things that you can do with some of these higher temperature reactor designs to produce, again, process heat, desalinate seawater, produce hydrogen or ammonia, serve a variety of industrial processes. So I think you're going to start seeing nuclear go beyond the grid and start being used in a wider range of applications. And that's really important because, of course, this isn't just a US market. There's a global market for this technology. And the fact is, one of our biggest competitors up until recently was Russia. And frankly, most of the company or the countries that we deal with have told us Russia's just taking themselves out of the bidding. Nobody wants to deal with the Russians. If they did anymore, they sure don't now. Even before the Russian invasion, in fact, our friends in the Czech Republic, who are planning on building between 1 and 4 new nuclear power plants over the next several years, had decided to take both the Russians and the Chinese out of the bidding because they didn't trust them. So it's now down to us, the South Koreans and the French. And if you look globally at what the market could be for next generation nuclear, we had an analysis done a couple of years ago that estimated north of $8 trillion in global economic activity, both in terms of continuing to operate today's plants and building and operating a next generation of nuclear power plants around the world. And again, the Russians and the Chinese have been seeking to dominate this market. They have entered into agreements with a wide range of countries that we haven't in the U.S. Now we're working to turn that around, and countries you see highlighted on this map, like Poland, for example, are now really intending to work with the U.S. Very interested in U.S. technology. In fact, our friends in Poland have contracts with 3 different U.S. technology suppliers to build a wide range of new nuclear plants because they want to get off coal and they don't trust the Russians. The reason that you see countries like Russia and China trying to dominate the sector is they can be a century-long relationship with the receiving nation, right? So it's a 5 or 10 year licensing construction period. Then it's going to be 60 to 80 years of cooperation while the plant is operated. And then there's a decommissioning phase. You stretch this out. This is essentially a century. And you're working with the recipient nation on things like nuclear security, nuclear nonproliferation, physical security, cybersecurity, a whole range of activities where, frankly, we want U.S. influence. Right? And so that's one of the reasons you've seen successive administrations leaning more and more into efforts to ensure that our companies can compete and win against these country-owned vendors in Russia and China and otherwise, because we win these contracts and establish these long-term relationships with other nations. So what I'd leave you with is that consumers and policymakers, both in the U.S. and abroad, are increasingly demanding low-carbon electricity, and we are seeing states and utilities responding with decarbonization goals. There is a growing understanding that new nuclear is extremely valuable. All right, we found that and many analyses have found that the systems include the type of clean generation that nuclear can provide. What we need, state and federal policy actions to incentivize investments, drive down costs, and we see tremendous opportunities in domestic and global markets if the U.S. can demonstrate these technologies at home and compete and win in these global export markets. So with that, let me bring the presentation part to an end and turn back the floor. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. That's really great. You gave us some optimism. That's a good thing to start with. Let's bring our other guest into the discussion. Reed Novotny is a member of the Maryland House of Delegates representing portions of Montgomery, Howard, and Carroll counties. He was appointed last year by Governor Larry Hogan. He serves on the Appropriations Committee, the Subcommittee on Education and Economic Development, and the Oversight Committee on Pensions. As a solid Republican, he volunteers for many party activities, and also he's a member of the Howard County Central Committee. He holds degrees in computer security and strategic communications, is a colonel in the Maryland National Guard, and previously served in the U.S. Air Force and as a staffer on Capitol Hill. He and his wife Lauren have 1 daughter and live in Howard County. Delegate Novotny recently announced his candidacy for the Maryland Senate. I am so glad to be able to welcome him tonight. As most of you know, tonight we're in the final hours of Maryland's legislative 2022 session. So the delegate is on constant call to vote right until midnight. You see him there on the floor of the House. Reed, tell us what's going on in general, and specifically, how can Maryland get out of this energy crisis?
Yeah, I'm gonna first just do a generic sound check. Dennis, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to go as long as we can. We're having some conversations on the floor, actually about street racing. So it's pretty interesting. It's a connection back to fuel, right? So thank you so much for having me tonight, and I'll make my discussion pretty brief. John, I learned a lot, but you know what I also learned? I learned that the policies that we're passing here in Maryland and Annapolis are contradictory to just about whatever you said, right? And I bring that up in the sense that I've had conversation with groups who have come and advocated on behalf of what the Green New Deal Maryland is actually trying to pass. And, you know, I just asked some simple questions. And John, I wouldn't get as complicated as you because I don't have your background, but simple questions like how and why. You know, how are we going to make the decarbonization of Maryland work? Are we just going to buy quote unquote dirty coal power from another state and then feel better about this? Because you understand that this is a world market, and the coal-fired plants that could be dirtier, right, that are just over the border in West Virginia, Pennsylvania. I'm gonna do something also. I'm gonna turn off my camera just to make sure I'm getting clearer. Is that any clearer?
Yeah. Okay.
Try not to move around a lot, probably too. So everyone knows they can Google a picture of me. I'm sitting here in the House floor, and they're having this debate. So this is interesting in the sense that when I ask people who are proposing to go green, they don't necessarily have a competent answer, in my opinion, of how we get from here to there. I think nuclear is all part of it. It's got to be. It is a clean answer. And I know we have the problem of not in my backyard, but there are plenty of places around Maryland specifically where we can do this. And it frustrates me. It does frustrate me on the floor when we have people who stand up from the Montgomery delegation that hopefully I'll have the opportunity to be a part of next year. But the Montgomery delegation, they come up and they actually advocate against their constituents who are working in this field. We've had many people from the Republican Party actually bring up the X Energy company and the technology they are advocating or they're developing for people around the world, for other countries, other states, but they're not willing to introduce that kind of technology here in Maryland. And it gets very frustrating, if that makes sense to everyone out there. And we go back to just what we're doing here locally about fuel in general. We even had a 30-day gas tax on just traditional gas for cars. That's going to run out this weekend.
Yes.
And then we're going to go back to 36.1 cents more. And just having people who can't afford 36.1 cents per gallon, it's infeasible for having them go out and buy a $60,000 or more Tesla tomorrow. I don't think we have an answer for that. So I think some of these policies that we're pushing here in Maryland, we're not actually doing. So I'm laughing here too. It must be funny. It's about drag racing on the floor. With that being said, you know, this is one of those things. I actually had the organization that represents and advocates on behalf of Maryland and nuclear power come to us, and I asked them this question too. I said, how are we advocating? It's an exciting day, I know. How do we actually advocate on behalf of new nuclear in Maryland? And they said, we don't want new nuclear.
Kevin.
We actually just want to keep the nuclear we have. And I was like, really? You're advocating on behalf of nuclear and you're not advocating for new nuclear in Maryland? And they said, no. We just want to defend what we have at this point. So I was fairly disappointed in that, but I'm a big fan and an advocate of we need to do clean energy different, if that makes sense. And you know the danger of nuclear energy. I don't think John you got into this as much, but the danger of nuclear power is not the same as it was 3 Mile Island, as we were talking about, and over in Ukraine, the issues we're having there. I actually was stationed in Japan right after the Fukushima incident, and that about 2 years afterwards, and they're still doing some cleanup there. But that's such a freak accident that the cost and the amount of risk there, just the benefit to the United States and to the world far outweighs the risk that we can have in that area. So it's my goal as I move forward through my elected officials positions here is to continue to advocate for ways that we can clean up our environment. And one of the main ways, I think one of the best ways, is through the nuclear energy. Solar, wind, and all the renewables that they have there are just not here. They're not delivering today. And I say this as a proud driver of a Tesla. And I am the only Republican in the state house on the House side that drives a Tesla. So I'm a believer. I know we can do it, and we can do it through the smart people like John and the others you mentioned, the companies we have in Maryland. And it's unfortunate that we're not leading this from Maryland, leading this for the United States and the installation and the design of all these plants around the world. So I'll stick on this, and hopefully if we have any questions about the policy aspect, love to answer them as we go through. But again, I apologize to the team for being so loud here, but we're in a long debate, so it's perfect timing. We're actually not voting right now that I got to speak to you all. So I'll go ahead and stop there and pass it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Delegate. We really appreciate your working in 2 different ways, talking to your constituents and being on the House floor. Jamie Greedon, are you there? Can you unmute yourself? And do you have any questions for the panel?
I have a question for John. You were talking about the list of different power plants that wanted to exist by 2030. Has there been any backlash from the Biden administration about those being built, considering they want, the Green Deal, Green Deal? I'm sorry.
No, that's quite all right. Actually, nuclear has been one of those rare areas of bipartisan agreement on clean energy. And so the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, the 2 reactors I mentioned, one in Washington and one in Wyoming, those started under the Trump administration, but are being continued under Biden. In fact, the bipartisan infrastructure bill included $2.4 billion for those 2 projects. So it was again a huge area of bipartisan agreement. The other demonstration project I mentioned, the UAMPS project, the small modular, that started under Obama and continued under Trump and is now continuing under Biden. Part of the reason, frankly, is that nuclear enjoys so much support among labor and among the rural communities that host the plants that it's caused leadership from both parties to say this is something we can really embrace and get behind. It's a way to create long-lasting, well-paying jobs. And so I'm pleased to say that we've been able to thread that needle and enjoy support from both parties.
Actually, I have a follow-up to that then.
Sure.
Then, since you said it was a bipartisan support, why is it whenever, you turn on the TV and you see Jen Psaki talking, she always talks about, solar and wind, and she never really mentions nuclear?
Yeah, there are still some folks, frankly, on the left that have a hard time saying nuclear. I am pleased to say, folks like Secretary Granholm, who leads the Energy Department, she hasn't shied away from, voicing her support. So it can be a mixed bag, and there, to be sure, there are still pockets of resistance. You mentioned the Green New Deal types, some of the fiercest advocates for that have not been supportive of nuclear, but most of the center left groups that are really focused on climate have said, look, we have to have it. And that argument's won the day.
Okay.
But great questions. Thanks, Jamie.
I have
And
one
I got to
here.
hand it to the delegate Novotny. That was about the best multitasking I think I've seen.
Pretty good,
That
isn't
was
it?
awfully impressive.
I know. I have a question here. in light of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, would it not make sense for Biden and the US to expedite approval of multiple liquefied natural gas export terminals, including those here in Maryland? This would help replace Russian gas being exported to Europe, while also helping friendly Asian countries receive reliable US energy.
Yeah, I think it's, I'm no LNG expert, but I think it's pretty clear that the more we can do to improve availability globally, the more that's going to hamstring Putin. Because, what did we learn? They get something like $1 billion a day, or I mean, some crazy number I heard over the weekend between their oil, gas, and coal exports. So, surely the ability to make it more of a world market is going to work in the favor of those who are opposed to people who try to use energy supply as a weapon.
And Reed, I know that we have an export terminal in Baltimore, the middle of Maryland. Is that going to help us out? He may have dropped off. I think he did. Oh, well, Jamie, do you have another question?
Let me check 1 second. Go check my list here. Actually, I have another question for John. So Keystone Pipeline, everybody talks about that. If it was built, because obviously Biden stopped it, how quickly could it be built to help us? And if it can be built fast, will it even help us at this point?
Yeah, and so I apologize. That's not my area of expertise, the pipeline stuff. So I don't have a great answer for you on that one.
No worries. That's okay.
Well, how about this one? How dependent is the US nuclear industry on Russian uranium and enriched fuel, and maybe Kazakhstan? Can the US become energy independent with uranium and nuclear fuel itself without going to these other countries?
Yeah, great question and timely question. So, in fact, the U.S. does get some uranium from Russia. When you talk about nuclear fuel, there's 4 steps that matter. There's the uranium mining part, and we do get some from Russia, but that really is a global market. And our biggest supplier is Canada. The Australians are very big in that market. You mentioned Kazakhstan. We get some uranium from there and some other nations as well. Where supply gets tight is in the next 2 steps. So after you mine the uranium, you have to convert it from a solid to a gas that you then put through a process they call enrichment. And the reason you have to do that is when you dig uranium out of the ground, it doesn't have the right amount of the specific type of uranium. It's an isotope of uranium, if you want to get a flashback to high school chemistry. All right. But so you need to enrich it in a certain isotope of uranium, and then you convert it into fuel. It's that conversion step and that enrichment step where the global markets are constrained. We have capacity for both here in the US, conversion and enrichment, but not enough to meet all of our needs and all of our allies' needs. And so we're going to need to see more investment from both the government and the private sector in the US to ensure that we can build the capability that we're going to need here in the US to move away from that Russian supply. And interestingly, if you go back far enough, just as an aside, the reason that we've got these commercial relationships with the Russians is that 30 years ago, the government encouraged it. Remember, after the fall of the Soviet Union, remember we were worried about Russian nuclear weapons and Russian scientists and nuclear materials falling in the wrong hands. Well, we put in place something called the Megatons to Megawatts Project. And for 20 years, the US encouraged utilities to buy uranium that was taken out of Russian warheads, blended down to reactor fuel grade, and then used in US reactors. And so for 20 years, 10% of the electricity in the US came from what used to be uranium and Russian warheads, right? But now, all right, so we satisfied a real non-proliferation purpose there. Now we've got to obviously move to an energy security and national security posture and get off of this stuff, and we're working to make that happen. So great question, a lot to it. Appreciate you asking. Other questions?
Jamie?
If I could throw in a comment here. The reason we are where we are as far as enrichment was during the Carter administration, they shut down programs to do plasma and laser-based isotope separation that would have drastically cut the cost and given us a stranglehold on world enrichment just because he was Carter.
Yeah, I would have pegged to the Clinton administration, but you're right. There used to be some advanced vapor laser isotope separation program that was looking at using that technology. In fact, it has been commercialized. There's a company in the US called, oh, now I'm going to forget the name of them, that is working to commercialize that laser enrichment technology. The problem is that prices in the enrichment market have been so low, they haven't been able to make a business case for it. So Paul, you're right, that could potentially be a game changer. And I think as we look at establishing more uranium enrichment capacity in the US or with our allies, I think that's one of those technologies we'll get a really close look. So thanks for bringing that up.
You're welcome.
It's strange that nuclear energy has one of the worst reputations for being unsafe, and it's actually one of the safest ways of generating a lot of constant energy. I guess because of 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and things like that, we have a very bad PR. Is there any way to turn that around other than I read an article today that said that no one's ever been killed by a nuclear plant?
Yeah, and when you look at the safety record of commercial nuclear power in the US and in the West, yeah, it really is second to none. What's interesting is when you look at public opinion towards nuclear, the numbers might not look great, but when you spend just a little bit of time talking to people about what nuclear energy does, and you talk about that safety record, you talk about the role it can play in a cleaner grid, you can see approval ratings go up by 20 plus points. It's an amazing shift that can take place in a short period of time because people aren't that well informed about the technology. So they tend to look to popular media. They tend to, listen to the loudest voices that are telling them, about the technology. And so we've been engaged in a concerted effort, particularly at the policymaker level, to help people understand why it's such a good thing from, an energy security position, from a grid reliability position, and as well as, the environmental attributes it offers and the long-term well-paying jobs. And that's why we've seen such strong bipartisan support. And I guess to your question about opposition, what we find is in communities that currently host nuclear power plants, public support is 20, 30 points higher than the average member, the average public survey. The communities that host the plants are the most supportive of the technology. Jamie, to your earlier question about the demonstration projects, in Wyoming, all right, they were looking at building that plant at the site of one of 4 coal plants that are slated for closure this decade, and all 4 communities were competing for the plant. They all wanted it, right? And I think we're going to see more and more of that type of welcome, particularly in communities that are facing the closure of a coal plant, because those are also facilities that provide long-lasting, well-paying jobs. And in fact, a lot of the skills it takes to run a nuclear plant are the skills it takes to run a coal plant. And so we get a lot of our utility members that are looking at replacing coal plants with new nuclear.
Jamie, do you have any more questions there?
I have a follow-up, actually, what you were talking about earlier, Dennis, about PR and about Chernobyl. And I mean, I don't know, I've watched Chernobyl on HBO and, it was all devastating and all that fun stuff. John, how do you think we can improve on that PR? I know you said people are just ill-informed, but how do you think, I mean, those of us here now, what information can we take to other people who are just like, solar and wind is better, but nuclear is cheap and effective and
Yep.
easily.
Yeah, I think when it comes to that, I mean, certainly there have been high profile accidents. Chernobyl is the only one that led to, you know, any direct loss of life, right? And that was because the Russians built a design you could never get licensed in the United States because it wouldn't pass our safety standards, and then they ran it in a way that you could never run it in the United States, and then they didn't tell people what happened, right? I mean, the way that the free world found out about it was that radiation detectors in Scandinavia were going off, right? And that's what forced the Russians to own up to the fact that they'd had this accident. So, you know, you look outside the former Soviet Union, the track record for nuclear is fabulous. What we tend to emphasize are the fact that, you know, it is nuclear that provides that 24/7 clean, carbon-free electricity that makes the grid stable, right? And we're going to need that in the future. You look what happened in Texas, you know, tragically a year and a half ago. California is increasingly finding energy reliability problems because they're letting their nuclear power plants shut down, right? So when we explain to people the role that it can play in decarbonization and job creation and in U.S. energy security, we see support go way up. So thanks, Jamie. Great question.
Reed, are you back yet, or are you still voting?
So we're on a small break, but you'll probably hear people announcing things in the background and clapping for people. So this is obviously a very festive day, our last voting day. Some people are leaving the house, so they're announcing their names right now. Back to your point, though, John, as far as being popularization, if you can still hear me, of the media profile of these nuclear events, it's just scary. One of the classes that we took at George Mason, when I was mentioned I have a master's in strategic communications, is that 1,000 people can die of heart disease and it's not a tragedy, but if 100 people die on a plane, that's a huge tragedy, right? So it's a perspective, right? You have one scary nuclear disaster that happened 30 years ago, and then the world is scared forever. But the truth shall set you free. I just appreciate having experts like you out there advocating on behalf of these common sense solutions.
Oh, thanks, Reed. And just to follow up on that, one of the interesting things that's happened since Putin's invasion and assault on Ukraine is our member companies are getting more and more interest, particularly from Central and Eastern Europe, because they want nuclear now. They realize they don't want to be reliant on the Russians for their energy supply. They're looking for U.S. origin nuclear technology. That's why we're seeing the Poles, the Czechs, the Romanians, and a wide variety of other countries throughout Europe refocusing on nuclear. Even the French are planning on building 6 new plants because they recognize they need the security that nuclear can bring.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
John, I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit about the possibility of having American LNG and American reactors supplant Russian influence or bad actors' influence overseas.
Yeah, and I certainly am much more aware of what is going on between our government and others in Europe on the nuclear front. But there has been a concerted push. In fact, I can tell you the Deputy Secretary of Energy was in Central Europe 2 weeks ago with a bunch of our colleagues, at NEI, talking to the Czechs, the Poles, the Hungarians, the Bulgarians, and a few other nations about how do we accelerate the export of U.S. origin nuclear technology. Frankly, I think gas was part of that conversation too, but certainly what I'm aware of is the nuclear piece. It's something we've seen from the last several administrations, is folks finally starting to recognize that it's really to America's advantage when we're the ones supplying energy to the rest of the world, and when we compete and win in civil nuclear export markets.
So true. That is so true. To be completely parochial, do you have any idea what the future of the Calvert Cliffs plant is, whether it's going to be expanded or?
Well, so be interested in Delegate Novotny's take in terms of the current legislation. My understanding was they finally were able to get at least some recognition in the bill of the importance of retaining our existing generation at the plant. But Delegate, anything you want to add on that subject?
Yeah, well, what's going to happen is right now, I know the House and the Senate are still in a little bit of tweaking the language between the two houses. So we will see. It's actually a fairly long bill, if you can imagine, from the state house perspective. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. It was discussed on the House side to keep it as is, if that makes sense. So keep status quo. I'll see what the Senate side says after that.
All right, thanks. So I think that certainly in the community around the plant, there's a lot of support for continuing the operation of the reactor. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but if memory serves, those two reactors produce almost 40% of the state's electricity, just on that footprint, and more than 80% of the carbon-free generation in the state. I mean, it's an enormous source of reliable electricity, well-paying jobs, tax base. I mean, all the things you want in an energy resource. And so I'm hoping that logic prevails, and at a minimum we keep that plant going. Of course, there have been proposals to build new units at that site in the past. Part of the challenge is going to be, does the grid, do electricity markets compensate those plants and potential future nuclear plants for everything nuclear delivers to the grid? And what we're seeing is in the states that still have regulated electricity markets, they're looking at building new nuclear because they can plan for the long term, and they can factor in the reliability, the resilience, in addition to the zero carbon in the long life into their calculations. When you're in a competitive electricity market, there's less of an ability for the state, absent some state energy policy mandate, to guide that. So we'll have to see, do the markets, or is there another way in which folks at Calvert Cliffs can get the full compensation for what that plant delivers to the grid?
Yeah, it's true. It is a great boon to the state. I mean, 40% of the power. It's an amazing, clean place to get our energy, and I don't think people appreciate it as much as they should.
Yep.
Jamie, you got any more questions?
I actually have another follow-up question. You said 40% of our state is the energy comes from that?
I'm going to look at Connor. Connor, do you have that number off the top of
It
your
is 41.8%.
Oh, well, there you go.
41.8%. So if those plants end up closing, would we experience power outages and blackouts like Texas did, or do we have enough backups that would not happen here?
Well, so in Maryland, we're part of this market called PJM. So at least in theory, you're tied in with other resources around that PJM, which is actually a 13-state region. PJM stands for Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland, which is where it started, but it now goes as far west as parts of Illinois and as far south as North Carolina. Where the challenge can come in is, we don't have adequate transmission to move electricity everywhere at every time when we need it. And so if you lost that generation there, you might have a struggle trying to bring electricity in on other lines. I just don't know enough about where the transmission constraints are. But in the short term, what would happen is you would run more gas plants or run your coal plants more often, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what's available to ramp up. But it'd be a huge loss.
Reed, do you have any final comments for us?
Yeah, just thank you. Sorry, I think you called on me, right, Dennis?
Yes.
It's loud here. And I apologize for wearing the mask. We are the last chamber in the United States, because the Senate is not wearing masks. We're the last chamber while we're in session. As you see me taking on and off while we're in session, we have to wear a mask. I digress. Been a great conversation. John and team, I've learned a lot. Yeah, 41% is what we keep on quoting here on the floor as far as the nuclear power. I think we need more. God forbid it goes away. If we are like Germany, we decide that nuclear power is a bad thing. All we're going to do is import more coal, more gas from other states, like John was just talking about. So it only makes Maryland worse. So hopefully the people on the other side of the aisle, good colleagues, don't get that in their mind that all of a sudden RICO is a bad thing, because we don't want Maryland just to go down the wrong track in this. Dennis, again, I appreciate you inviting me.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for your thoughtful comments. It's given us so much to think about and to act on as we continue to struggle regarding the serious issue of global and U.S. energy emergency. Folks, before we go, please make sure you continue to stay in touch with your local Republican Party. We need to hear from you. We intend to keep reaching out to you for help, support, guidance, fresh ideas. You can always email us at newsletter@mcgop.com. That's newsletter@mcgop.com. Yes, we're already planning the May Mondays with MoCo, and we'll send you the announcement and post it in our online newsletter, The Party Line. To our speakers, we'll make sure that everyone has your contact information after tonight so they can reach you. And further, any information you care to pass on, we'll pass it on to our people. We'll also include websites so that folks can reach you and support your cause. The folks who registered but could not make their presentation will be sent the recorded session. Again, if you catch the MCGOP newsletter, you'll see that I am hosting, excuse me, a reception for Delegate Novotny at my home in Gaithersburg, April 28th. If you can, I'd love you all to participate. I know you all join me in thanking our speakers for their thoughts and all they're doing to inform our country on this important subject. John Kotek, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Delegate Reed Novotny, thank you.
Before we go, Dennis,
Yes,
Connor joined us, and if he has any closing comments that he'd like to make before we go, could we give him just a few minutes to give his insight?
Connor, do you have a couple of statements?
I'd be happy to. I appreciate the opportunity, Paul and Dennis. So I'm a colleague of John Kotek's. I recently joined NEI just a couple of months ago. My background is actually in oil and gas. And I used to work for a company that owned CoPoint. So I'm very familiar with the state of the gas industry. And just something to leave you with, I first joined the gas industry at the height of the fracking boom in 2014, 2013. And where we're at in the nuclear space right now, it feels it's the same level of excitement, the same level of promise and opportunity. So it's a very exciting time to be a part of the industry as this new wave of technology comes online, and the unbelievable promise that it brings with it. Because we all know that energy changed lives, it makes all of our lives better, and to have more equitable, better access to clean energy is it's hard to argue with that. So with that, I'll turn it back to Dennis, and I appreciate the call out, Paul. Thank you.
Well, we really appreciate you coming and joining us. Yes, we are on the cusp of a big change. So it is exciting and terrifying at the same time. So, well, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for the Republican Party. I'm Dennis Melby. Have a good night and a good April.